samsaradava nalalidaloka tranaya karuna gana ganatvam
samsaradava nalalidaloka tranaya karuna gana ganatvam
praptasya kalyana gunanavasya vande guru shri charanaravinda
praptasya kalyana gunanavasya vande guru shri charanaravinda
Mahaprabhu kirtana nitya gita vaditra madhyan manasorasena
Mahaprabhu kirtana nitya gita vaditra madhyan manasorasena
romancha kampa shutaranga vajo vande guru shri charanaravinda
romanchakampa sutaranga vajo vande guru shri charanaravinda
shri vigrahara dana nityananam shingarathan mandiramarjanado Yuktasya bhaktam sanyunjatopi vande guru shri charanaravinda
romanchakampa sutaranga vajo vande guru shri charanaravinda
chaturvida shri bhagavat prasado swadana triptan harivaksha sangram
chaturveda shri bhagavat prasada satvana triptan harivaksha sangram
kritraiva triptim bhajata sadaiva vande guru shri charanaravinda
Bhajata sadeva vande guru shri charanaravinda
Shri Radhika Madhavayoda Phara Madhurya Leela Gunarupa Namna
Radhika Madhavayoda Phara Madhurya Leela Gunarupa Namna
Pratikshana Lolupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Pratikshana Lolupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Nikunjayono Ratikeli Siddhai Yayali Vir Yuktir Apekshaniya
Nikunjayono Ratikeli Siddhai Yayali Vir Yuktir Apekshaniya
Tatrati Daksha Ativala Bhasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Atrati Daksha Ativallabhasa Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Sakshadaриtvena samasta shastre uktastatha bhayate vasarvir
Sakhyadaritvena samasta shastre Ruktastatha bhavyata eva sarvi
Kinto prabhurya priya eva tasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Kintu prabhoja priya eva tasa Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Yasya prasada bhagavad prasado Yasya prasada nagati kutopi
Yasa prasada Bhagavad prasada Yasa prasada Nagati kutapi
Jayam stuvam stasa yasatri sadyam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Jayam stuvam tasa Yasatri sanyam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda 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 Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinda
Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine
Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine
Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastyatya Deshatarine
Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pachata Deshatarine
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna
Chaitanya
Prabhu Nityananda
Nityananda
Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya
Chaitanya
Prabhu Nityananda
Nityananda
Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya
Chaitanya
Prabhu Nityananda
Nityananda
Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Whoa.
Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna
Krishna
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare
Hare Hare
Hare Rama Hare Rama
Rama
Rama Rama Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Sitaram, Jaya Lakshman Hanuman.
Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Sitaram, Jaya Lakshman Hanuman.
Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha.
Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya.
Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai.
Jaya Gauranita, Jaya Gauranita, Jaya Gauranita, Jaya Gauranita.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva, Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva.
Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol,
Jai Gora
Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari.
Jai Vishwapara Paramsa Prabhajaka Jodi Sutara Srishishimad. His divine grace of Hocharavina Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Pratishta Viviti Samstapakacharya Vaishnava Siramani Parit Pavana Srila Prabhupada Ji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Gauri Guru Vargarpati Udhari Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhakti Raghunatha Shri Jiva Gopala Bhakti Dasa Guna Sadgoswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ji Ki Jai. अनंत कोटि वैष्णववृंद की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिव श्री गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। जय परम दयाल श्री नित्यानंद प्रभु की जय। प्रेम नाम संकीर्तन के जनक प्रेम पुरुषोत्तम श्री सच्चिदानंद स्मरण गौरंग चैतन्य महाप्रभु गौर हरि महावरण अवतार की जय। गोलोकेर प्रेमधान हरि नाम संकीर्तन जग की जय। जोगत धर्म हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की जय। Brihadanga Transcendental Book Distribution Seva Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Narada Kund Samakund Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Brajabhim Vrindavan Mathurdham Ki Jai. The Lordship Shri Shri Radha Nilamadhava Ki Jai. Shri Mayapur Navadvip Eka Chakradam Ki Jai. Paramakuruna Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Jai. Shri Purushottam Ketra Jagannath Pridam Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Swami Baladev Prabhu Spadra Devi Surashan Chakra Bhagavan Ki Jai. Shri Ayodhya Puri Dham Ki Jai. Shri Ram Lakshman Bhakta Hanuman Ji Ki Jai. Bhakti Sarva Vignamina Kanu Shingare Bhagavan Ki Jai. Jaganga Mai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Vrindi Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Mati Radharani Ki Jai. Shamaveta Bhakta Vrindi Ki Jai. Nitai Gaurari Pramanande. All glory to the assembly bodies. All glory to the assembly bodies. All glory to the assembly bodies. All glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Shri Guru Shri Gauranga.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Aladaladaine Hiranyakashipurvakshaha Shilatanka Nakalai शिलटङ्कनखलाये इतो नरसिंह परतो नरसिंह येतो येतो यामि ततो नरसिंह
जय जत जत जामि ततो नृसिंह
येतो येतो यामि ततो नरसिंह
जत जत जामि ततो नृसिंह
मही नरसिंह हृदये नरसिंह बहे नरसिंह हृदये नरसिंह नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपद्ये
नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपद्ये
तव करकमलवरे नाकामद्भुतशृङ्गा दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गा केशवद्रीता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
तव करकमलवरे नाकामद्भुतशृङ्गा दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गा केशवद्रीता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
केशवद्रीता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
जय केशवद्रीता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
जय जगदीश हरे जय नरसिंह दे जय नरसिंह दे जय नरसिंह दे जय नरसिंह दे
जय नृसिंह रे जय नृसिंह रे जय नृसिंह रे जय नृसिंह रे
जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज
जय प्रहलाद जय प्रहलाद जय
जय
प्रहलाद
जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद
जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद
जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव
जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव
श्री भक्ति विघ्न विनाशक श्री लक्ष्मी नरसिंह देव भगवान की
जय
जय श्री प्रहलाद महाराज की।
श्री वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी शतवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी शतवताय नमो नमः। वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी शतवताय नमो नमः। श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंदा देवी की जय।
नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्णा प्रेयसी नमो नमः
तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी
तुलसी कृष्णा प्रेयसी नमो नमः
तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः।
राधा कृष्णा सेवा पाबो एय अभिलाषी
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो अभिलाषी।
राधा कृष्णा सेवा पाबो एय अभिलाषी।
राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो अभिलाषी।
ये तुम्हार शरण लोय तारा वंच पूर्ण हो।
ये तुम्हार शरण तारा वंच पूर्ण।
कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावन बासी।
कृपा करे तारे वृंदावन वासी।
मोरा ये विलास विलास कुंज दियो वास।
मोरा ये विलास कुंज दिया
नयने हेरी बो सदा युगल रूपरासी।
अमिनायने जुगल
दीन कृष्ण दास को ये न मोरा होई
दीना कृष्ण दास को ये न मोरा
दीन कृष्ण दास को ये न मोरा होई
दीना कृष्ण दास को ये न मोरा
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा ये न बासी
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 यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे पदे
कानि कानि सा पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादि कनिसा तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे पदे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे पदे
तानि कानि सा पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादि कनिसा तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे पदे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
तानि कानि सा पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादि कनिसा तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे पदे
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
तानि कानि सा पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादि कनिसा तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिण पादे
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
जय तुलसी महारानी जय वृंदा देवी जय तुलसी महारानी जय वृंदा देवी
जय तुलसी महारानी जय वृंदा देवी, जय तुलसी महारानी जय वृंदा देवी.
जय वृंदे जय वृंदे जय वृंदे जय श्री वृंदे
जय वृंदे, जय वृंदे, जय वृंदे, जय श्री वृंदे.
निताय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल
निताय गौर हरि बोल, हरि बोल, हरि बोल, निताय गौर हरि बोल. Shri Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. O Tulasi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire to attend the service of Shri Radha and Krishna. We will take shelter of you as wishes fulfilled. Bestow your mercy upon him, you make a resident of Vrindavan. My desire is that also give me residence in pleasure groves of Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus, within my vision, I will always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower of Kavita of Raj. Please give me the privilege to bless my service and make me your honored servant. This very fallen and lowly servant of Krishna praise. May I always sing in love of Shri Radha Govind. Shri Mati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Ki. Jai Gautama Marjana
Aslisya Vatadaracham Penastimam Adashanam Korotuva Vidatu Lampatu Matmanatasta Sahila Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram
Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Ki Jai. Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years, and extinguishes the fire of conditional life with the pity of birth and death. This Sankirtan moment is a prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the light of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. And thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have invested all your transcendental energies. It is not even hard and just fools to chanting these names. O
O
my
my
Lord,
Lord,
out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names. But I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name of the Lord in humble state of mind, thinking oneself Lord and strong street, one should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense
sense
of
of
false
false
prestige,
prestige,
and
they
should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. Only one who causes the devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yes, somehow or other I'm following this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms of the yellow sweet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up? When will the hairs of my body stand on end of that recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and it should remain so. Even if he sunders me rightly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me, he is completely free to do anything and everything. He is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri 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 Krishna Ki Jai. There are 10 offenses in marriage chanting the holy name of the Lord that must be avoided.
and they are
As follows. Blasphemy, body, dead, life, or provocated in the middle.
two. Consider the names of demigods like Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, of equal to and independent names Lord Vishnu.
3.
To disobey the orders of the spiritual
Four.
to blaspheme the Vedic literature and pursuance of the Vedic versions,
5.
to the glories of chanting Hare Krishna as imagination. 6.
Give some interpretation of the name of the Lord. 7. Commit simple activities on strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. To consider the chanting of Hare Krishna is one of the auspicious activities which are often Vedas as spiritual activity karma. 9. Respect the fearless person by the glories of the holy name. And 10. Faith in chanting the holy names and to maintain material attachments,
Even after understanding so many instructions in this matter, it is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be a Vaishnava is carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success, Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just like desired trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vanchikal paturabhyascha kripasindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Vaishnava Thakur ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Saraswati Deve Guruvani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine Shrimad Bhagavatam Grantaraja Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadyasya Yato Nivayad Itaratascha Teso Vigyaswarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Dikavaye Muyanti Yatsurayaha Tejo Varimidam Yata Vinimayo Yatra Trisargomesha Damna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dimahi. O my Lord Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisance unto you. I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes, of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion. As one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen on fire or land seen on water, only because of him do the material universes, temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature, appear factual although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Dharma pojita kaitravatra paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavam atra vastu Sivedantapa Trayon Mulanam Shrimad Bhagavate Mahamani Krite Kim Vaparir Ishwaraha Sadyo Hridi Avarudyate Tra Kriti Bihi Susubhidistaksanat Susubhidistaksanat, completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated. This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam sukhamukad amrita dravya samyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhur aho raska bhuvibhavakaha. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desired true Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful. Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. Shinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hiriyantak Stohi Bhadrani Vidunati Srihit Satam. To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures, or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita, is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best-wishing friend, and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. Nasta presu abhadresu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utamasloke bhaktir bhavati naistaki. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. Tadarajastamo bhava kamalobhadayaschaye chete tairanavidam stitvam satve prasidhati. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lusts and avarice are diminished. Evam prasana manaso bhagavat bhakti yogataha bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Vidyate hirdaya grantis chidyante sarvasamsaya siyante jasya karmani drista eva atmanishware. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the heart knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of samsayam samagram, understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth, Personality of Godhead. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of God, Krishna. Shri Guru Vastika prayers ki jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it. So the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. I offer my respectful obeisance unto Lotus Feet as such a spiritual master who is an ocean of auspicious qualities. Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments. The spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind. Sometimes his hair stands on end. He feels quivering in his body, and tears flow from his eyes like waves. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Sri Radha and Krishna. He also engages his disciples in such worship. They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments, clean their temple, and perform other similar worship of the Lord. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food. Analyzes that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasada, he is satisfied. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava. And their qualities, names, and forms. The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert at assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavana. I offer my most humble obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the Lord. This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of such a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Sri Hare Krishna. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master. At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lotus Feet of my spiritual master. Shri Brahma Samhita ki jai, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadiraja Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. Chintamani Prakata Satma Sukalpa Vriksha Lakshavrite Susurabhira Vibhaliyantam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambhrama Sevyamanam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Venum Kvananta Ravinda Dalayataksham Parhavatam Samasitam Buddhasundarangam Kandarpa Koti Kamaniya Visesha Sobham Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandra Kalasadvanamalya Vamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranaya Keli Kalavilasam Shyamam Tribanga Lalita Niyata Prakasam Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Ananta Rupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vede Sadurlabham Adurlabham Atma Bhakto Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastukoti Satavatsara Sampragamyo Vayoratapi Manaso Muni Pungamanam Sopyastiyat Prapadasimya Vichintya Tattve Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sora Chaitam Jagadanda Kotim Yas Chaktirasti Jagadanda Chaya Yadanta Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yad Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajasta Taiva Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusaha Suktaryameva Nikama Pratitaistuvanti Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Patibhavitabis Tabirya Eva Nicharupa Tayakalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Santak Sadeva Hidesu Vilokayanti Yasham Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukalani and Menatistan Nana Avatara Makarod Bhuvanestu Kintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pamamyo Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadanda Kotim Koti Kotisvasesu Vasudadi Vibhuti Binam Tad Brahma Niskalam Anantam Ashesha Bhutam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Maya Hiyashak Jagananda Satani Sute Jaigun Yatad Vishaya Veda Vitayamanam Sattva Valambi Parasatvam Visuddha Sattvam Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Mataya Manasu Ya Praninam Pratifalam Smaratam Upetya Lilaya Tena Bhuvanani Jayaya Jasram Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Goloka Namni Nijadamni Talecha Tasya Devi Mahesu Haridama Sute Sutesu Tete Prabhava Nichaya Vihitascha Yena Govinda Madi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Shasti Stati Pralaya Sadhana Saktireka Jaiva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga Ichchana Rupam Apiyasya Chichesta Tesa Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Siram Yata Dadi Vikara Vishesha Yoga. Sanjayate Nahitata Pritakasti Heto. Yasambutam Apitata Samapaiti Karyat. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Diparchadeva Hitasantanam Abhyapetya. Dipayate Vivitahetu Samanudharma. Yastadrigeva Hicha Vishnu Taya Vibhati. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yakarnanarna Vajale Bhajati Sma Yoga. Nidramananta Jagadanda Saruma Kupa. Kupaha Adhara Shaktim Avalambya Param Swamurtim. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yasyaika Nisvasitakala Matavalambya. Jivanti Loma Villaja Jagadanda Nataha. Vishnur Mahan Sahi Yasya Kala Vilchesho. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Basman Yatasma Sakalesu Nijesu Tejaha. Swiyam Kiyat Prakatiyat Apitadvadatra. Brahmaya Esa Jagadanda Vidanakarta. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yat Pada Palava Yugam Vinidaya Kumbha. Dvande Pranama Samayesa Ganadi Rajaha. Dvande Pranama Ganadi Raja Yagnan Vihantam Alamasya Jagatrayasya. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Agnir Mahi Gaganam Ambu Marudisascha. Kalastatatma Manasiti Jagatrayani. Yasmad Bhavanti Vibhavanti Vishanti Yamcha. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yaschak Suresa Savita Sakalagrahanam. Raja Samasta Suramurti Rasesha Tejaha. Yasya Gaya Brahmati Sambrita Kala Chakro. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Dharmo Tapapa Nichaya Srutayastapamsi. Brahmadikita Patagava Dayasta Jivaha. Yadata Matra Vibhava Prakata Prabhava. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yastrindra Gopa Matavendra Mahoswakarma. Bandhanu Rupa Falabhajana Matanoti. Karmani Nirdahati Kintu Chabakti Bhajam. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayati Bitti. Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaurava Sevya Bhavahai. Sanchintya Tasya Sadrisim Talmat Purete. Govindam Adipurisham Tamaham Bhajami. Shriya Kanta Kanta Parama Purusha Kalpataravo. Druma Bhumish Chintamani Ganamayi Toyamamritam. Kata Ganam Natyam Gamanam Apivamsi Priyasaki. Chid Anandam Bhuti Param Apitad Asvadyam Apicha. Sayatra Shiradi Bihi Shavati Surabi Byas Chasumahan. Nimesa Dakyuva Vrajati Nahiya Trapi Samaya. Vaje Svita Dvipam Tamaham Iha Golokam Itiyam Vedantaste Santakshiti Viralachara Katipaye Shri Supanishad Ki Jai Om Purnam Ada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vasishyate Ishavaishamidam Sarvam Jatkinja Jagatyam Jagatena Taktena Bunjitaha Agritaha Kishasviddanam Kurvan Evahak Karmani Jajiva Chekchitam Samaha Evam Tvayi Nandite Tosti Nakarma Lipite Nare Asurya Namate Loka Andena Tamasamritaha Tamste Pritya Bigachanti Yeke Chat Mahano Janaha Anijadika Manaso Javio Nena Devam Apravam Pravam Asat Tadavatu Nyana Teti Tista Tasminapo Matariswa Dadati Tadejati Tanejati Tadure Tadvantike Tadantarasya Sarvasya Tadu Sarvasya Bayataha Istu Sarvani Bhutani Atmani Eva Nupasyati Sarvabhute Suchatmanam Tatuna Vichikupsate
Yatu sarvat bhutani anmani avanubhusati sarvabhuteshu charmanam tatuna vipsati
Yasmin Sarvani Bhutani Atme Vibhujanataha Tatrako Mahakaha Sukha Ekatvam Anupasyataha
Yasme sarvani bhutani admava bhutvijityata tatrako dhamava shloka ekavana
Sa Prayagachukam Avrinam Asnaviram Sudam Apapavidam Kavir Manisi Pariu Wu Swayambhu Yatatat Yuto Ritan Vyadatat Chasvatipyaha Samabhyaha
sarvajan tukam akayam avijanam asnavidam sudam apapam vidam
Kavir Manisi Paribu Swayambhu Yatatat Yuto Ritan Vyadatat Chasvatipyaha Samabhyaha Andham Tamha Pavisanti Ye Vidyam Upasyate Tato Bhuya Vate Tamo Yayu Vidyayam Rataha
kavi manasi prabhu sudambu yatutu yatyutan yadarachat samambhya
Anyad Evahur Anyad Abu Vedahur Vidyaya Anyadahura Vidyaya Iti Susruma Dhiranam Yenastad Vichachak Sire
Namera vidya anyahura vidya ityosishum dhilamam yitatar
Vidyam Cha Yas Yastad Vedo Bayam Saha Vidyaya Militarum Tijva Vidyayam Ritamastute
vidyam chayas tar vidadamanyasa avidayam rityum churva vidya
Andham Tamaha Pravisanti Yesambhuti Mupasyate Tato Bhuya Vate Tamo Yayusambhutam Rataha
Anamantama pravishanti ye sambhutna upsate tato yad tamo yasa sambhutayat
Anyadevahur Sambhavat Anyadahura Sambhavat Iti Susrumadhiranam Yenastad Vichachakshire
anyaretavu sambhavat anyadavuda sambhavat iti sushrudinam yesatari
Sambhutim Cha Vinasam Cha Tat Yastad Velo Bayam Saha Vinasena Militim Trudva Sambhutam Vitamasnute
sambhutim cha vinashanam cha yastari vadodyam saha pavisiram rityum tirtva sambhutyamritam
Hiranmayana Patrina Satyasya Pihitam Mukam Tatvam Pusamapavrinu Satyadharma Yajistaye
Iranmayena patrena satyajititamukam tatvam pusham avitu satya dharmaya
Pusaneka Seyamasuya Prajapatya Vyuharasmin Samahatejo Yate Rupam Kayanatamam Tate Pusyami Yosabaso Purushaha Sohamasmi
Pusarikashi yama surya pratijapatya viyasmena samomatejo tatita rupam kartya tam atite pusyati
Mayuranmitam Amritam Atedam Basmantam Sariram Om Kratos Smara Kritam Smara Kratos Smara Kritam Smara
Vayuranilam amritam atidam bashmantam tam shariram Om Kritu Smara Tankritam Smara Ratu Smara Kritam Smara
Om Agnenaya Supatare Asman Vishwani Deva Vayunani Vidvan Yodajmas Juhuranamino Buyustam Te Nama Uktim Vedama Om Tatsat.
Agnena Yasuputan Vayasman Vishani Deva Ayunan Vajidam Vidadi Asman Nayunatan Eno Vyatita Nama Vitakam Vijanam
Shrimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 6, verse text 39. Sa esa adya purushaha
Saisha Agya Purusha
kalpe kalpe kulpe srijatya jaha atman atmani atman atmanam sa samyachati paticha. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. That Supreme Original Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, expanding his plenary portion as Mahavishnu, the first incarnation, creates this manifested cosmos, but he is unborn. The creation, however, takes place in him, and the material substance and the manifestations are all himself. He maintains them for some time and absorbs them into himself again. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The creation is non-different from the Lord, and still he is not in the creation. This is explained in the Bhagavad Gita 9.4 as follows. Mayatatam idam sarvam jagat vyaktamurtina matstani sarvabhutani na teshu na chaham tesu avastitaha. The impersonal conception of the Absolute Truth is also a form of the Lord called Avyakta Murti. Murti means form, but because his impersonal features inexplicable to our limited senses, he is the Avyakta Murti form, and in that inexplicable form, the Lord, inexplicable form of the Lord, the whole creation is resting, or in other words, the whole creation is the Lord himself, and the creation is also non-different from him, but simultaneously, he, as the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is aloof from the created manifestation. This is an amazing alternate translation of this verse. Maya tatamidam sarvam jagat avyaktamurtina matstani sarvabhutani natchaham tesu avastita. So that's the 9th chapter, 4th verse of the Bhagavad Gita. And let's read what the translation is in the Bhagavad Gita. It says, by me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. So, here in this purport, there's a much more elaborate explanation of what he means by Avyakta Murti. And it's very interesting because in another place, he also explains let's see where that is. Yeah, in another place in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, 3rd chapter, 33rd verse, Prabhupada again gives an alternate translation where he says, Bhagavan pervades all by his material cosmic manifestation, the Brahman effulgence, and his personal existence as the Supreme Lord, Supersoul. So this is, one time I asked the question, I said, in this verse, by me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. I said, is this referring to the Brahma Jyoti, or is it referring to the Supersoul? So someone raised their hand and says, it's Brahma Jyoti. Another person raised their hand and said, it's Supersoul. And then another person raised their hand and said, it's Brahma Jyoti and the Supersoul. And that's the correct answer. Because Krishna pervades everything as the Supersoul, right? And everything is situated on him as the Brahma Jyoti. So he is all pervading in two ways, as the Brahma Jyoti and the Supersoul. Okay, so we'll continue. So here he gives an amazing explanation of what he means by Avyakta Murti, which means the unseen deity, or the unmanifested form. The impersonal conception of Absolute Truth is also a form of the Lord called Avyakta Murti, Murti means form, but because his impersonal feature is inexplicable to our limited senses, he is the avyakta murti form. And in that inexplicable form of the Lord, the whole creation is resting, or in other words, the whole creation is the Lord himself, and the creation is also non-different from him, but simultaneously, he, as the original personality of God, Sri Krishna, is aloof from the created manifestation. So this is an explanation, a brilliant explanation of Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva, which was the tattva taught by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 500 years ago. So, in the Vaishnava schools of thought, you have the Sri Vaishnavas, they talk about Vasista Advaita. And then the Mayavadis, they talk about Kevala Advaita. And then Madhvacharya, it talks about Dvaita Advaita. And then I think it's Vishnu Swami talks about Dvaita. But Lord Chaitanya, he explains it as Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva. So here we have you have the four Vaishnava authentic sampradayas, the Sri Sampradaya, the Kumar Sampradaya, the Rudra Sampradaya, and the Brahma Sampradaya. Then you have the Mayavadis, who claim Kevala Advaita, absolute oneness. And then you have Lord Chaitanya is explaining the Beda Tattva. So, in other words, he says, the absolute truth is simultaneous and inconceivably one and different. So this is a more let's say detailed explanation of what is Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva. The impersonal conception of the absolute truth is also a form of the Lord, called Avyakta Murti, meaning the unseen form. Murti means form, but because his impersonal feature is inexplicable to our limited senses, he is the Avyakta Murti form. It doesn't mean he has no form. It just means that we, with our limited senses, cannot perceive it. Therefore, it's called Avyakta Murti. But Murti is there. It's still a form. Now, let's hear what he says. And in that inexplicable form of the Lord, the whole creation is resting. Or, in other words, the whole creation is the Lord himself, and the creation is also non-different from him, but simultaneously he, as the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is aloof from the created manifestation. Now, Prabhupada continues, the impersonalist gives stress to the impersonal form or the feature of the Lord, and does not believe in the original personality of the Lord. But the Vaishnavas accept the original form of the Lord, of whom the impersonal form is merely one of the features. So this is the main difference between Mayavadis and Krishna conscious devotees. The Mayavadis who claim Kevala Advaita, the absolute truth is absolutely one, and it cannot be anything else. So they have a very incomplete understanding of absolute truth. And this is established also in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Vadanti tat tattvavitas tattvam yajganam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti sabhyate. So that's a very important verse in first canto, second chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam that explains that the supreme absolute truth is realized in three steps: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So the Brahman is what the Mayavadis are talking about, but because they are the number one proponents of cancel culture, they have canceled Paramatma and Bhagavan, or Vaikuntha and Goloka Vrindavan. They say that doesn't exist. There's only Brahman. So we see that they have a very limited piecemeal understanding of the absolute truth, and because of that, they fall down from Brahman, even though they go through so much arduous efforts to achieve Brahman realization. They fall down because they have an incomplete understanding of it. It's just like, let's say Jeff Bezos sends a rocket to land on the moon, but his experts miscalculate and the rocket misses the moon and goes past it. What would happen to that rocket in open space? It would eventually be destroyed because it's going out in space. It doesn't land on a planet. It didn't land on the moon. It won't land on any other planets. So we see, and by the way, the extent of the space, extent of outer space is so great, and the distances between the planets and the asteroids and all these things is so great that that rocket would not land on any other planet. It would miss, and it would be destroyed eventually. So in the same way, the Mayavadis, because they reject Vaikuntha, they reject Goloka Vrindavan, they reject Krishna, they reject Narayana, they reject everything, and say there's only Kevala Advaita, there's only the Brahman. Even if they attain Brahman realization, they will fall down because there's no relationship, personal relationship with Krishna or his plenary expansions. Therefore, the Mayavad philosophy is the most pernicious, nasty, and incomplete understanding of the absolute truth because of their adamant insistence that there's nothing beyond Brahman. So there's a difference between an agnostic and an atheist. An agnostic is someone who says, well, look, all I know is Brahman, but I don't know anything else, but I'm not going to close the door on understanding. If you can convince me there's something beyond that, I'll accept it. That's an agnostic. But he says, but for the time being, I don't have any information of anything beyond Brahman. So I can't say it's there, I can't say it's not there. But if you can convince me, I will accept it. So that's an agnostic. But an atheist is like the Mayavadis. They say, there's no such thing beyond Brahman. It's all fantasy. It's Disneyland. It's fable. It's your imagination. So that's an atheist. Although they believe in one aspect of the supreme absolute truth, which is to their advantage, but because they're so adamant that there's nothing beyond it, they are atheists. Whereas there are such thing as bona fide impersonalists. A bona fide impersonalist is like the agnostic. Even if they attain Brahman realization, they don't say there's nothing beyond. They say we don't know about it. But we're not going to close the door on it. If you can convince me, I'll accept it. So therefore, people like the four Kumaras and people like Sukadeva Goswami, they were impersonalists, bona fide impersonalists. But when they heard about Krishna from bona fide authority, like in the case of Sukadeva Goswami heard from his father, Vyasadeva, in the case of the Kumaras, they actually went to the door of Vaikuntha, and although they cursed Jai and Vijay to fall down to the material world, Lord Narayan appeared right before him and apologized to him for his two doorkeepers. But when Sukadeva Goswami, the four Kumaras bowed their heads down to Narayana, they smelled the fragrant aroma of tulsi leaves, and it convinced them that Narayana is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they surrendered to him, and they became real devotees, pure devotees. So we see there is such thing as a bona fide impersonalist, but the Mayavadi is not a bona fide impersonalist. They're basically the first proponents of cancel culture. They canceled the whole Vaikuntha and Goloka. See? And they also cancel the material world. They say it's an illusion. It doesn't really exist. So you can play around in it. It doesn't matter because it's all an illusion. As long as you do some meditation and you realize that there's only Brahman, there's nothing else, and it's all nirakar, formless. So this is nonsense, right? They're the most nonsense of all. Okay, so, and the other reason why they fall down from the Brahman realization is because even though in the material world there is devotional service. Even in hell, there's devotional service. Even in the lowest planets, there's possibility of devotional service. In Vaikuntha, there's devotional service. In Goloka, there's devotional service. There's only one place where there's no devotional service. That's Brahman realization. That's why these fanatic oneness people, they fall down, even if they attain Brahman realization, because there's no devotional service. You need two people for devotional service: the lover and the beloved, or the servant and the master. So the Mayavadis, they believe that they become Brahman. They become the absolute truth by merging into it and by rejecting their own individuality and rejecting the individuality of Krishna. So it's not difficult to defeat a Mayavadi if you studied carefully the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, because they're on very tenuous grounds. Okay, so let's continue the purport. And Prabhupada says, the impersonalist gives stress to the impersonal form or feature of the Lord and does not believe in the original personality of the Lord. But the Vaishnavas accept the original form of the Lord, of whom the impersonal form is merely one of the features. The impersonal and the personal conceptions of the Lord are existing simultaneously, and this fact is clearly described both in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and also in other Vedic scriptures. So he's saying there's a personal and impersonal conception of the Lord are simultaneously existing. So therefore, Lord Chaitanya says, Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva. The Supreme Absolute Truth is inconceivably and simultaneously one and different. And everything is like that. Everything is like that in the material world, and everything is like that in the spiritual world. Okay, so therefore he says, the impersonal and personal conception of the Lord are existing simultaneously, and this fact is clearly described both in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and also in other Vedic scriptures. Inconceivable to human intelligence, the idea must simply be accepted on the authority of the scriptures, and it can only be practically realized by the progress of devotional service unto the Lord, and never by mental speculation or inductive logic. Very important statement, because there are certain things that we have to just accept. And if we accept them and follow the process of devotional service, then we will be able to realize it. So the scientists, they'll never realize the absolute truth, because they reject the existence of God. They reject the spiritual world, and they say there's only the material world. And therefore, they don't engage in devotional service, even though they could theorize there's a spiritual world, but they still would not realize it, because the only way to understand it or be cognizant of it is through devotional service to Krishna. So they're performing their service to humanity, to the planet, to the goddess Gaia, or this thing or that thing, to their grandfather or their grandmother. They're offering service to all these different mundane things, but that's not the same as rendering service to Krishna. So therefore, they're in a hopeless situation. And all they do is come up with theories. A theory is not the truth. It's a hazy idea of something, but in very incomplete, and usually not sufficient to actually understand the thing or the phenomenon. The impersonalists depend more or less on inductive logic, and therefore they always remain in darkness about the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. So what does that mean, inductive? So there are three types of pramanas. There's inductive, deductive, and there's devotion or Krishna consciousness. So deductive pramana or proof is you begin with the a priori truth of the Vedas. Like, for example, it says, Aham sarvasya prabhava matak sarvam pavartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. So you accept that as a self-evident absolute truth. and then you deduct from it. If Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then everything else is subordinate to him. And he's the Supreme Controller, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha. So he's the Supreme Controller of everything. That means everything belongs to him. Therefore, everything should be used in his service. So you see, we're deducting. Deducting means you start with a first premise, but in the case of Vedic knowledge, those premises are absolute truths. Whereas the scientists or the philosopher, if they use deductive reasoning, like, for example, Descartes, he was an expert in using deductive reasoning. So I'm not going to go into it, but just giving a quick example of it. So he said that, okay, I accept that there's only one thing that exists, that's me. And then he deducted from that, right? But he made mistakes because there's above the living entity is also the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But he assumed the Supreme Personality of Godhead based on understanding that he was the only thing that actually he could not reject in his logical process. He was actually using the process of neti, rejecting everything that he was not absolutely sure of. So he rejected the existence of God, but he couldn't reject that he himself existed. So as soon as he was sure of one thing, then he began to deduct from that other things. But of course, he ultimately failed because he only theoretically accepted the existence of God, but not practically. But the devotees practically accept the existence of God because Krishna makes a definite statement, Aham Sarvasya Prabhava, that he is the origin of everything material and spiritual. And then when you deduct from that point, everything else that you deduct is also true. If you deduct from something a first premise that's not absolutely true, then you'll end up deducting something, and if you compare it to actual existence, you'll see it's not true. Anyway, I don't want to get too complicated with that, but here it says that there are certain things that must simply be accepted on the authority of the scriptures, and it can only be practically realized by the progress of devotional service unto the Lord, and never by mental speculation or inductive logic. The impersonalists depend more or less on inductive logic. Okay, now what is inductive logic? First of all, there was deductive logic. Now it's saying inductive logic. It means that you have a hunch. You make a guess. You say, well, I think that man is immortal because I've seen everybody die, and probably I will also die. And in the future, I have a good idea that most people, or everybody, will die. So he begins with he said, but no, I should actually experiment to see if this is true. So he does an experiment. And the bigger his field of examination is, the more chance there is of seeing a pattern. And then when he finds the pattern, then he makes up a theory to explain the pattern. So he thinks that, okay, I think everybody is immortal, but I'm not sure, so let me experiment. So he does an experiment. And he analyzes the lives of, let's say, 100,000 people in history. And he sees that they all died. So he said, well, this certainly points to a pattern that everybody is mortal. And then he reads about Jesus Christ, who resurrected from the dead. So he thinks, that's just fairy tales. It's not possible, because I examined 100,000 people, and this guy's supposed to be a exception. I can't accept that. But if I could find someone now who is an exception, then I could maybe say that everybody is not mortal, right? So basically, his inductive process is always going to be incomplete because he won't live long enough to analyze everybody. And on the other hand, based on the 100,000 people he did analyze who died, he could come up with a theory that all men are mortal. but he wouldn't be absolutely sure of it. So, in the case, but most people don't start with something that is evident. They start with things that are not evident. Like, for example, a black hole. Someone theorizes that there's such thing as a black hole in the universe. So then they do some experiments, but obviously you can't prove it practically, because by definition, if you go near the black hole, you'll die, right? So therefore, they just theorize things nowadays, and they make up names, and they use complicated language, and basically, as long as what they theorize cannot be proven, they get famous for a period of time until somebody else comes and makes another theory that can't be proven and replaces that theory. So this is what they're doing now. It's cheating. They're just coming up with one theory after another that are impossible to prove, and therefore they become famous. They write books on it. They give lectures on it, and phony people go to listen to them and believe it for a little while until another theory comes up. See? So that's what's happening today. Previously, there was some scientific work, legitimate scientific work being done. Nowadays, it's all phony stuff because they haven't discovered anything new since the 1890s and the early 20th century. Okay, so the impersonalists depend more or less on inductive logic, which is you analyze a lot of things and you try and see a pattern in it. And based on that, a little bit of a pattern, you make up a theory until it collapses. Like in the case of Newton's laws of mechanics, or movements of bodies under the law of gravity, it collapses when you study microscopic particles at the speed of light. So they had to come up with a new theory called quantum theory or string theory or whatever. Okay, so their conception of Krishna, it says, the impersonalists depend more or less on inductive knowledge, and therefore they always remain in darkness about the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Their conception of Krishna is not clear, although everything is clearly mentioned in all the Vedic scriptures. A poor fund of knowledge cannot comprehend the existence of an original personal form of the Lord when he is expanded in everything. This imperfectness is due more or less to the material conception that a substance distributed widely in parts can no longer exist in the original form. Well, this is the Mayavadi's falling point, or this is why they can't understand Krishna. Because they say, if there is an original substance or thing or person, but that person or thing is expanded infinitely, then it loses its original oneness. Right? And then they say, but it's impossible for Brahman to be less than one. Therefore, whatever we're seeing in this world that's divided into millions of different objects and people, it's all illusion. That was the way they got around the acceptance of the material world as a reality, and therefore their famous Mahavakya is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. That means only Brahman, the impersonal effulgence, is the truth, and the whole material world is false or an illusion. And the Vaikuntha and Goloka, they don't exist. They're not even an illusion. It just doesn't exist. Right? So this is their crazy conclusions based on false logic. But therefore, if you just read the invocation mantra of the Shisha Upanishad, it says, Om Purnam Ada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. The Supreme Absolute Truth is perfect and complete. And because it's perfect and complete, everything that emanates from the Supreme Absolute Truth is also perfect and complete. And although there are millions and billions and infinite number of perfect and complete unities emanating from the Supreme Absolute Truth, still he remains perfect and complete. So that one mantra defeats the whole Mayavad concept, that they think that a poor fund of knowledge cannot comprehend the existence of an original personal form of the Lord when he is expanded in everything. This imperfectness is due more or less to the material conception that a substance distributed widely in parts can no longer exist in the original form. That is why they cannot understand Krishna as the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead. The original personality of Godhead, Adya, Govinda, expands himself as Mahavishnu incarnation and rests in the causal ocean which he himself creates. The Brahma Samhita 5.47 confirms this as follows. Yakarna narada vajale bhajati sma yoga nidram ananta jagadanda saroma kupaha adhara saktim avalambya param swamurtim govindam adipurisham tamaham bhajami. Lord Brahma says in his Brahma Samhita, I worship the primeval Lord Govinda, who lies down in the causal ocean in his plenary portion as Mahavishnu, with all the universes generating from the pores of hair of his transcendental body, who accepts the mystic slumber of eternity. So this is talking about Mahavishnu, plenary expansion of Lord Krishna for the creation of material world. So where is Mahavishnu situated? Well, you begin with Krishna, the Supreme Absolute Truth, and then his first transcendental expansion, Lord Balaram, who's non-different than the Lord. The only difference is Balaram is light-colored and Krishna is dark-colored. But otherwise, there's no difference between the two. They both have exactly the same potency. They are both the same person. And then from Balaram, there's another plenary expansion called the first Chaturvyuha, made up of Vasudeva, Sankar's son, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. And then from that is expanded Narayana. And from Narayana comes the second Chaturvyuha, again, Vasudeva, Sankar's son, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. But that is the origin, the second Chaturvyuha is the origin of the Vishnu incarnations in the material world for the material creation. And the first Vishnu incarnation is Mahavishnu. And then Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, then Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, the super soul of all living entities. So these are what you would call plenary expansions of Krishna. Then there's partial plenary expansions, and then partial plenary expansions of the Lord. So now you have the avatars. You have avatars that have animal bodies, and the ones that have animal bodies are called nimitic avatars. They don't have eternal planets in the spiritual world. But then there are human-like avatars, like Vamanadev and Lord Rama and so forth. And they have eternal planets in the spiritual world. And therefore, some of them are called plenary expansions. Plenary means complete. They have all the complete power of Krishna. And some are partial plenary. And then you have partial plenary expansions of avatars in the material world. And then you have the expansion of the jivas, who are not plenary expansions of the Lord, but they are expansions of the Lord. And then you have also the material, and you have the devatas along with the jivas. Devatas are also jivas, but they're more powerful and more knowledgeable. And then you have what's called the material creation itself. All that is expanded from Krishna, and he's maintaining all of it in several ways by his internal energy, his marginal energy, and his external energy, and is maintaining all of it. And then you have, and it's all situated on the Brahma Jyoti. The spiritual world is situated on this Brahma Jyoti, and the material world is situated on the Brahma Jyoti. And then above, and then also in the material world, you have the Virat Rupa form of the Lord that encompasses everything. So it keeps going on and on. I mean, this is Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva, inconceivable and simultaneous oneness and difference. Okay? And if you learn all these things, and there's even more that we have to learn, because here we're hearing directly from Brahma, who is Krishna. There's no higher authority in the material world than Brahma. and you have Brahma, and you have Narada and Shiva. All three of them are the highest authorities in the material world. And then you have the what's called the 12 Mahajans. Well, the first three are Brahma, Narada, and Shiva. And then you have Kumaras, Kapila, and Manu. And then you have Prahlada, Janaka, and Bali Maharaj, or Bhisma. And then you have Bali Maharaj, Sukadeva, and Yamaraj. So they are authorities. Every one of those authorities, or Mahajan, says that Krishna is the supreme absolute truth. And Brahma, who's a demigod, right? But he's the top intellectual in the material universe. He is confirming here, verse after verse, that Krishna is the supreme absolute truth. So then, and he spoke to Brahma Samhita, in which there's no doubt Ishvara Parama Krishna. Krishna is the supreme absolute truth. And every one of the Mahajans also says clearly, Krishna is the supreme absolute truth. And he's the source of everything, including the Vishnu avatars. So this Mahavishnu is the first incarnation in the creation, and from him all the universes are generated. And all material manifestations are produced one after another. The causal ocean is created by the Lord as the Mahatattva, as a cloud in the spiritual sky, and is only a part of his different manifestations. The spiritual sky is an expansion of his personal rays, and he is the Mahatattva cloud also. He lies down and generates the universes by his breathing, and again by entering into each universe as Garbhodaksha Vishnu. He creates Brahma, Shiva, and many other demigods for maintenance of the universe, and again absorbs the whole thing into his person, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 9:7, Sarva Bhutani Konteya. O son of Kunti, when the kalpa, or the duration of life of Brahma, is ended, then all the created manifestations enter into my prakriti, or energy, and again, when I desire, the same creation takes place by my personal energy. So therefore, Einstein's theory E equals mc squared is a fact, that energy and matter are interchangeable. And Krishna is the one who does that, not Einstein, not anyone else, right? The conclusion is that these are all but displays of the Lord's inconceivable personal energies, of which no one can have any full information. This point we have already discussed. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we'll stop right there. Are there any questions? Yeah. Yes. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it.
How so many misconceptions? How so many misconceptions came into like who is supreme personality of God? All
Like even Sri Vaishnavas, they say that Narayana is the supreme personality of God, and Krishna is an incarnation of Narayana, and he's the super soul. There's so much silliness and nonsense. It's unbelievable. But that's because people in this world are envious of Krishna. We all rejected Krishna and voluntarily chose to try and become Krishna ourselves. And the only way, as soon as we have a thought like that in the spiritual world, immediately we fall down to the material world. And in the material world, we get a material body that covers our soul, and then we identify with the body, and then we make up all kinds of theories. As soon as you identify with the body, you cannot see things as they are. So then you start guessing and making up theories.
So people are just ignoring this and making their own theories.
Yeah. Because they're covered with this. We are all covered with this material body. As long as we identify with the body, we just come up with theories. We cannot really understand the truth. It's only when we use the body and all facilities in the service of Krishna, at that point, Krishna begins to reveal himself to us. And he sends Guru. And he sends devotees out distributing Bhagavad Gitas and books about Krishna. And then you have a chance to begin to understand, I'm not this body. The body is the source of the false ego. Identification with the body and a desire for sense gratification, independent of the Lord, is the source of illusion. Everybody in this material world is full of illusion. It's just flapping around, in the ocean of ignorance, coming up with all theories. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma Vando Mui Savadana Mate Janara Prasade Bhai Bhavatoriya Jai Krishna Prapti Oyaha Hoite Guru Mukha Padma Vaikya Chitete Koriya Aikya Arana Koriya Mane Asa Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Utamagati Prasade Pure Sava Asa Chakshutan Dilaje Janme Janme Prabhu se Chakshutan Dilaje Janme Janme Prabhu se Divya Gyani de Prakasito Divya Gyani de Prakasito Prema Bhakti Chaha Hoite Avidya Vinasajate Prema Bhakti Chaha Hoite Avidya Vinasajate Vede Gajana Racharito Vede Gajana Racharito Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu Lokenath Lokera Jivana Lokenath Lokera Jivana Lokenath Lokera Jivana Aha Prabhu Kora Doya Deha More Padachaya Mahaprabhu Kora Daya Deha Mule Padachaya Ebeas Kusakchi Bhuvana Ebeas Kusakchi Bhuvana Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namah Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namini Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta-vrinda Chaitanya Nityananda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta-vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jai Gaura Premanandi ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Pararajakacha Tarasatarashi Shishimad. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vinda ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Shri Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudhi Gaura Bhakta Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sham Kunda Radha Kunda Krishna Ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Shri Mayapura Dham ki jai, Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai, Shri Tulasi Devi ki jai, Shri Bhakti Devi ki jai, Ganga Maya ki jai, Jamuna Maya ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to Samaveda. All glories to Samaveda. All glories to Samaveda. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Patita Pavana ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Putali Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanam. Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pacharini. Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatani. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Putali Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamani. Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pacharini. Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatani. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain the pure devotional service. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is perfection and fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him, ecstatic prema emanates. By him, ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor and Lord and master of devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the three worlds. We take shelter in your lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada ki